Good evening. We are the Patriots of Faith. I'm Tyler Carr.
I'm Jordan Wallace.
And we're going to talk about some issues of interest in this segment. That's what we decided to start calling our special topics segment, issues of interest. And our issue of interest today is the importance of definitions. Now, why did we choose definitions of all things to talk about in this segment? It has to do with the current debate on religious freedom, gay rights, abortion. There's a whole host of issues that we could talk about.
When you think about all of these issues too, I remember talking to folks, fellow college students, back when I was at Tech and everything, and you talk to these folks and they'd be like, well, I'm this, and this, but I'm liberal. But then you start talking to them, they sound like they're conservatives. So a lot of folks don't even know. We won't cover the political definitions right now, but a lot of folks get confused on these issues because they don't know the definitions. They hear definitions through the grapevine. They hear them from different people and say, oh, that must be what it is, when someone else may have been mistaken on a definition. So people need to go back and start researching what really is the key definitions for all these issues. And I think a lot of folks would find current events, studying history, studying politics, and all those other things, and even especially from the faith perspective, folks would find that a lot more interesting if they know what is in the bounds of definitions.
Oh yeah. When I've been in history class or really any of these classes where they talk about those definitions, it really helps to open my eyes and helps me to understand, what I believe and, what I could consider myself. But we're going to talk about some definitions that have to do with some really specific issues this time.
And this is key too when you think about it, because when you look at everything going on, you can really put everything under the umbrella of a culture war. We're looking at, that's why you always hear about conservative liberal too, because it's the old standard, what's been with the traditional values. The traditional culture is, in a lot of ways, a lot of folks feel like it's being brushed aside and pushed away in favor of a new standard. So it's a culture war is what we're facing, and that affects everything from the issues we're talking about tonight, these cultural issues, but it broadens out to that into foreign policy, economics. But like you said, we're going to focus on some of the very key cultural issues today, because what we're experiencing and what really everything is in a nutshell around us is a culture war. So that's why we're going to look at these definitions. Are important to know when you look at the whole scheme of things.
The first issue we're going to talk about is that of religious freedom. And of course, there's been a debate about that recently. Of course, we had the Indiana governor sign into law something which people on the left claimed could enable discrimination against gays by business owners. And of course, that was eventually reversed to where it wouldn't be such a controversial law. And then now we see where Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal actually issued an executive order for their religious freedom bill to be put into place.
Interesting case in point, too, going back to definitions, that Indiana law was actually mistakenly, the controversy came out of it mistakenly, because the original intent of that law was, because just like what happened with Hobby Lobby going before the Supreme Court, and what mandates folks to try with their businesses and everything else, mandates them to try to do things that are against their faith, like with Hobby Lobby. It had nothing to do with homosexuality or same-sex marriage or anything else, but had to do with Obamacare, had to do with prescriptions and that sort of thing, birth control pills that Hobby Lobby didn't feel comfortable from a faith perspective given to their people. So it's interesting how, again, from a definition standpoint, a lot of folks got that controversy all mixed up, and it became a social media explosion too, because folks would have hearsay or just see something on Facebook and say, oh, that's awful, but it had no idea what the direct intent or definition of that law was. So it's fascinating how that throws everybody all up in arms about it.
But what defines the boundaries of religious freedom? Where does that freedom stop? Well, there's a lot of different opinions on it. There's a variety of them. A Washington judge told a florist who refused to provide flowers for a gay wedding that her freedom to do that ended whenever gay marriage became state law in Washington. The U.S. Solicitor General told the Supreme Court in the current gay marriage case that's going on right now that if it ruled in favor of gay marriage, the tax-exempt status of religious colleges and possibly even churches, I believe, could be affected. if that became law. And those who oppose gay marriage could be affected by that. So because the freedom of religion isn't well defined, these issues are going to keep persisting. And I think someone needs to step up and actually define what is religion.
Well,
or what is religious freedom, I'm sorry.
That's where it's important, too, to keep everything in context. That's why a lot of folks will say the Constitution is a living document. This religious freedom issue is key because it goes back to the First Amendment. It's one of the very first, it is the first part of the Bill of Rights, so it's very vital about these definitions of religious freedom. And we need to go back and we need to look back at the writings of the Founding Fathers and look at the context they put them on, because that's what makes a Constitution so special. It was written not just for that time, but for the future. It was intentionally vague on some points because they knew that things would be changing and that sort of thing. And so it was meant to, in a way, to be able to, that way it wouldn't have to be changed when it comes up to this time. So it's just like religious freedom and those other issues. It doesn't have a 20 or 30 page document on what religious freedom is. That's why we need to go back to the writings and the speeches of the Founding Fathers and see what their beliefs were and see with what intent they had for all these issues of the Bill of Rights and everything else as well.
You can learn a lot from reading the speeches and whatnot coming from our Founding Fathers. It helps to bring to light some of the issues that are found in the Constitution that
Absolutely.
maybe we don't quite understand like we should. And it really helps us to understand.
Another issue that comes up too, because like you said, there's various definitions. Just because the United States government, just like with the issue of marriage, I mean, marriage is something that came around before the United States government. So a lot of folks are going back and saying, of course, you might be going to some of these definitions here very shortly, but a lot of folks are starting to go back. There's, I believe you said, was it in Arkansas or Louisiana, and I think also a legislator in Oklahoma. They're trying to find ways to get the government out of marriage. And we'll be talking about marriage here shortly. But it's one of those things too that religious freedom, marriage, life, and these other things. Just because the government rules certain ways on that, does that mean that we have to change our perspective away from the Bible as Christians? We're practicing Christians. I mean, we know as Christ, following Christ is our forefront. That's what's priority. And does that change just because the government rules a certain way? And that's something that a lot of folks have to think about. But
we'll talk about that here in our next segment.
Absolutely.
We'll talk about marriage a little bit, actually a lot. But the question with marriage really is, what standard are we going to go by? Who defines marriage? Some say that it's the feeling of love that should be the standard, but do we really want to follow that down the road to its logical conclusion? I mean,
we've talked about this before, maybe on the show before too, but you can find articles online. There's legitimately a person that wanted to find a legal marriage status for him to marry his computer, and that was the basis he went by. He said, why? He said, if homosexuals and other folks can have marriage rights based on love, they said, why can't I? He said, it's the object of my love and my passion and my time I spend and everything. So I mean, like you said, I mean, if love is the standard of marriage, that's going to be the logical conclusion. Where does it end? What partnerships are legalized and not legalized by that standard?
Exactly. And then we have those who say that the research is in support of the traditional family and model, and that's true. It is. There's plenty of research you can find that shows that the traditional family, the father and the mother, that is the best family model for children, for their upbringing, and just for the overall well-being of a family.
And you could even see that probably people we know that had. I mean, it's horrible for folks that have the single-parent lifestyle to an extent too. I mean, sometimes it's not a fault of one person or the other and that sort of thing too. But it ends up having a horrible conclusion a lot of times because certain children, if they have a single mom, they're looking for a father figure. There's a lot of folks, whether it's at church or whether it's at school, wherever else, they're looking for folks to be a father figure. And the same thing if it's a single father with the girls look for a motherly figure. So that's evidence right there, common sense evidence that we don't have to go into a deep study that costs thousands of dollars. But there's evidence right there that the both genders are very crucial to that.
Exactly, and it's the same thing with homosexual relationships too. A lot of children come out of those families confused.
Absolutely.
About their identity, about what they should do in their life, and a lot of things. But here's even though the research is in support of the traditional family, is research the standard that we should go by? Because research on a lot of things can be flawed. And a lot of research, as we know, is motivated by an agenda. For example, evolution. They will say that the evidence and the so-called research, it's used by some to say that it should be taught in schools as fact. And they try to bring that into the government and try to legislate that sometimes. And so even though the research might be in support of something, we need to be careful before we use it as the standard for doing that. And with marriage, since many consider it a religious institution, some say that religion can also be the standard. And many of us believe that. But a lot of people harshly object to that because not all people believe in the Bible or even in God at all.
Again, evidence of the culture wars that we're experiencing all around us.
Yeah. So, what's going to be the standard when it comes to marriage? The Alabama Senate, and he mentioned, I think, an Oklahoma senator also brought this up. They voted to nullify all sides of marriage and to make it purely a private institution. In other words, the government cannot define marriage at all. So because of the implications of the government redefining marriage and all that could cause, is this the solution? What do you think about that?
Well, it's one of those things too, like I mentioned a short while ago, the marriage has been around since before the United States government, and the United States government really has interjected itself in these cultural issues, these values issues, and they've done it in the last 50, 100 years, but I mean, for years it's always been more of a faith perspective, as we'll see here in just a moment, more of a religious definition, so to speak, God's definition from the Bible. And that's something, like you said, we'll cover in the next segment there. But it's that's crucial to think about it that way, because it's funny how years ago a lot of these liberals used to reject the notion that we should legislate morality, so to speak. But now that the trend is going towards more government involvement in these things, and the government's going in their favor, now they're for building up more government involvement in these key cultural issues. So we need to go back and research that again to actually get government out of the culture, so to speak. We need to start with the government, more or less, because the government's already interjected itself, and you have to unwind that, so to speak, after all these decades.
Exactly. Quickly, we're going to talk about another important issue that has to do with abortion. And that is, of course, what exactly is life? What defines life? Well, this is, I think, the simplest. I was talking to someone the other day, and I said, they were criticizing a friend of mine for using a source that wasn't too credible, that had a video about certain abortions that were being performed, that were showing how bad the situation actually is. And she was criticizing the source, and I said, look, you really don't even need a credible source in order to figure out what you believe on abortion. It's a logical, it's a logical and a moral issue, really. You don't really need a whole lot of fact to really get your belief on that. Common sense. Science does too, but common sense also. They both tell us that regardless of its developmental stage, a human being is a human being. It's a continuum. There's not a certain point at which a human becomes a human, a person becomes a person. From the time the sperm meets the egg, you are a human being. You're a person. And a living embryo, it's not simply a potential person, it is a person with potential. And to say that it's okay to terminate the life of this person, especially without its permission, yeah, that's age discrimination.
Absolutely.
Organizations like Planned Parenthood, they're driven by a money-based agenda that feeds off these desperate women who are unexpectedly pregnant, and the facts go clearly against them. They can't deny that. And there are a lot of other options besides abortion. To say that it's the best option for women in that situation is an outright lie. Human life is human life from conception to death, and we have no right to terminate the lives of those unborn who have no voice or say in the matter.
Looks like we're pressing up against time.
Yeah, the womb should be the safest place for a child.